Goku and Piccolo jumped out of the way as the great ape Raditz threw a fist with a roar. They barely got out of the way as, despite the imposing size, he had somehow got even faster. "Why are you running, brother?" he said before cackling, which received a growl in reply from Goku. He hated that he hadn't seen this coming. And now, if anyone got hurt because of him, he would leave that for later. "Piccolo, let's go!" the Namekian replied with a grunt, before following Goku as they dodged another punch before charging up the arm towards the head. Some of the Z fighters could only watch in horror as they had no idea how they were going to defeat him now. Those who had seen Goku in this form before knew just how powerful he became, and if the same applied to his supposed brother, then it looked bleak, especially with just how large his key signature became. They were all stunned for moments as they could only watch Goku and Piccolo duck and dodge barely in the distance. All of them suddenly turned when they saw Master Roshi walking away from the screens of the drone. He was quiet, walking with a straight posture that they hadn't seen from him in a long time. He stood outside, drawing everyone's attention before he turned his attention to the glowing ball of ki that was in the sky. Master Roshi dropped his cane before beginning to stretch and then threw his glasses aside, then his turtle shell. "Wait, Sensei, what are you doing?" Krillin asked, wanting to know, but already he wanted to run off and help Goku. He knew, like some of the others, that they had to cut off the tail. "Go and help Goku and Piccolo. I will try to see if I can take care of this." Yamcha was about to dispute when suddenly Master Roshi's energy seemed to spike suddenly, causing massive gust of wind as he started to grow in size, his muscles bulging as his eyes began to whiten. Some of the other fighters took a subtle step back as they were shocked to see this much power, especially those that had seen him use it before. Goku seemed to notice the large spike of power. It was nowhere near close to the three of them, but it wasn't something to scoff at. But he quickly ducked out of the way of a tail whip that came from the great ape as he gained some distance away. Master Roshi started powering up even further before putting his hands together in a very familiar pose. He quickly blasted a Kamehameha wave as he shouted as the giant ball of ki that he had gathered in his hands was blasted upwards, forcing some of the fighters to grab onto something to stop them from being blasted away from the sheer power of the beam. The beam rocketed towards the massive gathered ball of ki before they met in a blinding explosion that momentarily lit the entire area in a shimmering blue light before fading. Master Roshi immediately fell to his knee, breathing heavily as his muscles began to shrink down. Yajirobe quickly took out his bag before throwing a bean at Master Roshi, which he quickly accepted and ate. He had pushed himself in that one simple move to the brink of death, putting as much power as he could till he felt his vision fade, and without the bean, he doubted it would have gone well. They all were looking up at the now empty space in the sky, but they saw that the great ape didn't disappear. In fact, he seemed to be even more enraged as he upped his attack on Goku and Piccolo, who were still dodging but now caught glancing blows that, if it were not for his size and power, wouldn't be damaging. "Damn it! He's still like that!" Yamcha shouted. "Looks like we have to cut the tail again," Krillin said, even though he doubted that they could do it as easily as they had before. He looked around at their assembled group before his eyes landed on Yajirobe clutching his sword. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. "Yajirobe, we need to use that sword to cut off the tail. Can you lend it to us?" Krillin asked as he reached for it. But Yajirobe simply put out his hand, stopping him. "No! If you need to do something that requires that much skill, only I, a samurai, can do it." The Z fighters looked around at each other confusedly and disbelieving. After all, none of them had seen him fighting. But even though he saw their confused and nervous faces, he stepped forward with one hand clutching his sword as he eyed his target in the distance. "Let's go." Piccolo fired another of his special beam cannons as the great ape tried to reach for him, but his beam had still been somewhat effective as it dug into the skin of the great ape, but failed to breach through. The blast allowed him to get some distance away as Goku charged in with a Kamehameha blast already straining in his hands. He aimed right at the snout of the great ape, something he had remembered from his early ventures with Bulma when fighting giant wolves. Raditz shrieked back with a roar as he stumbled slightly but shook off his daze, his anger only growing. He was tired of this battle, tired of his brother, tired of this planet. He was going to make him regret going against him if it was the last thing he ever did. With a sickening glee, his eyes finally landed on something that could hurt his brother for sure: the crater, where his little spawns were currently held. He had come all this way for them, so Raditz could guess he valued them more than normal Saiyans did. There truly was nothing Saiyan about him, so that could hurt him. He started laughing as a beam of energy started gathering in his mouth. Goku and Piccolo were confused as he was aiming what appeared to be a ki blast he was charging at them, but it only took a moment for his true target to register. "Raditz, no!" Goku screamed, rushing in front of his vision to try and wave him down, but he was unceremoniously swatted away, crashing into the dirt, but was on his feet within a moment, rushing to get in between the kids and the blast. He was battered and bruised. His body ached all over as he chewed on the last bean he had on him, rising his Kai level back up. He knew that he didn't stand a chance against the massive power of the great ape, but he had to try. Raditz ready to blast in his mouth as Bulma and the other Z fighters could only look on in horror. Raditz fired the gigantic ki blast from his mouth, and Goku responded in kind with a Kamehameha. The blast collided, sending a massive shockwave around the area as the two boys inside the pod could see the giant ki blast being held back by their father. Goku was pouring as much power as he could into his blast as he screamed from the sheer strain and pain, even if he knew it was a lost cause as the giant beam from the great ape was pushing his Kamehameha back. He felt himself skid as he struggled to keep his footing, digging his feet into the ground as his whole body ached from the strain of releasing so much ki all at once. The sheer amount of power coming from the two was simply frightening, especially as they could continually see Goku's distant form being pushed back in the near-blinding light. Krillin, Yajirobe, Yamcha, and Tien raced faster as they saw the two blasts colliding. They had been pushed back by the initial clash, but they had quickly recovered as they rushed toward the scene. They arrived just as Krillin could see Goku disappearing in the giant beam from the great ape. "Goku!" Krillin screamed in horror as Yajirobe rushed past him, eyes already set on his objective. He clicked his blade out of its scabbard, and with a slight twitch, faster than anyone could follow, the others only watched in amazement as the giant tail fell to the ground. Raditz only seemed to notice only a moment too late as he swatted all of them away, but the deed had been done. He felt his strength start to wane as his body started to shrink, the hair beginning to fade as the world seemed to be only getting bigger and bigger. The other Z fighters let out a cheer as they saw the great ape of Raditz shrinking, but that happiness soon waned as on the monitors Raditz stood weakened from his transformation, gasping for air with a mask of rage. In his final moments as the great ape, he had swatted and bashed away at all the fighters that had been near him, including that annoying Namekian. He doubted they would probably give him one of those beans again. His scouter had fallen off during his transformation, so he didn't know how powerful any of those that interfered had been. No doubt they probably held more in hiding like Goku. Speaking of Goku, Raditz could see the proper form of his bastard brother lying on his back on the ground. Some of his limbs seemed twisted at odd angles, and all his clothes were torn with burns from the blast all over him. He would have liked to vaporize him for his ignorance, but just having him dead would suffice. But he wasn't dead. There was a massive crater between the two of them, but Raditz could have sworn he saw the shift of his chest, if only he had his scouter. But even the chance that his rubbish brother was alive was enough to spur him to fly over to his brother's prone form. Bulma and Chi-Chi could only watch with fear lacing through them. They turned to dash for the capsule copter, but Roshi stood in their way, stern-faced, as if he had already read their minds about what they wanted to do. Rushing after him to your own death would not be something Goku wants for you. They wanted to argue, but their eyes were drawn to the monitors as Raditz landed next to Goku. He was right. The bastard was still breathing. He had taken most of the blast, and slightly behind him, within more carved-out surroundings, was the pod, miraculously intact, which just made Raditz grind his teeth. Inside the pod, the two boys could only watch from the glass as their evil uncle stood over the frame of their dad. They had seen him standing fighting the giant monster with a kameha. He had momentarily glanced back at them with a smile before the blast had engulfed him. They had screamed for him and had to shield their eyes as the blinding blast filled their vision. But they hadn't been hurt, and when they could see again, the monster had disappeared, but now their uncle stood over their dad. He looked hurt. He wasn't moving. Trunks and Gohan were crying. He was going to hurt their dad, and no one was there to help. Trunks felt himself pushed back as suddenly energy started gathering around his brother. He looked at Gohan as his energy continued to grow as he muttered to himself again and again before screaming. Raditz stood over the broken body of his brother. He wondered how their parents would feel after having their pride as Saiyans pulled two ways. He had won, and the runt had lost. It was no matter, he thought, as he aimed at his brother, who had finally gathered enough energy to open his eyes and look over in horror. "Raditz, no! Just die, Al!" He never finished the sentence, and his Kai blast was sent veering off into the distance as someone he could see, had collided with a massive force into his gut. He felt the wind knocked out of him and himself buckle as he slammed away the offender to find none other than Kakarot's little spawn had harmed him. He thought he was secure in the pod, but from the massive pain in his stomach, that had been proven wrong. He shook off his stunned state as his eyes focused on the boy that was now scratched up before he kicked him away towards the body of his father. Goku could only look on in horror as Gohan was kicked to his side, the little boy crying out how it hurts. "Raditz, please, no, don't do this," Goku begged, knowing full well the monster he was facing. Raditz gave him that sadistic smile, and Goku felt his heart drop. No, not like this. Goku used whatever strength he had to push Gohan as much as he could away from him. But the futile attempts only seemed to excite Raditz. "If you care so much for that runt, then watch him die." "No!" Goku, Chi-Chi, Bulma, and the others screamed. Suddenly, a bright purple and yellow swirling beam of Kai burst through Raditz's back, coming out of his chest, before landing in the distance with an explosion. Raditz stood there shocked. He glanced down at his chest to see the massive hole that was now in his chest. He glanced back at Goku, and Goku could swear that for the first time in their fight, he saw true fear on his supposed brother's face. Raditz fell over with a hard thump, uttering his final words. "Darn! Namakion!" He started laughing as blood gushed out of his mouth as he stared at Goku. "They will come to avenge me. You will never be forgiven for this. The others are stronger than me and won't show mercy," he said as he finally stopped moving. Everything was silent for a moment as everyone awaited the possible next surprise. But none came as the others that had been swatted away by Raditz finally started getting up. Within moments, Bulma, Chi-Chi, and Master Roshi arrived in the capsule copter. The two burst out of the plane, already hitting their strides. Chi-Chi rushed over to Goku, and he was smiling before she quickly hopped over him and rushed towards Gohan, who seemed to have passed out from all the crying. Bulma skidded to a halt over Goku, shocked by what she was seeing, but when she met his face, he was smiling, even if she knew some parts of your body aren't supposed to be turned that way. She kneeled next to him, quickly checking him over. He strained against her, but he could hear the unanswered question hanging in the air. "He's all right. I can feel him. Go check on him." She nodded at him and stood up, looking at him with some hesitation. "Go, I swear I'm fine." She nodded and left. Bulma got to the now blown-off side of the crater before sliding down the side towards the pod. It was completely destroyed, which was a blow that was quickly remedied by Trunks, fine standing next to it as he scratched his head. She picked the boy up. He panicked for a moment before he realized who was holding him. He was still crying, but Bulma just held him tightly. Chi-Chi peeked over the side of the crater, worriedly looking down at the two. "Is he okay?" she shouted down, and Bulma gave her a thumbs up and could not keep the smile off her face as the other woman sighed in relief. Bulma trekked back up the crater walls till she was reunited with the others as they surrounded Goku, with some of the Z fighters trying to figure out the best way to pick him up and take him to the capsule copter. "It's a good thing you didn't die, Goku. Reviving you would be easy with the Dragon Balls, but traumatic for the kids." He nodded from the ground as he was raised up, chancing a glance at the unmoving body of his brother. "It would have taken 2 wishes, since I think my so-called brother was rather content with watching me die." The words felt bitter in his mouth, as he could taste the truth in them, even though he didn't really know the man. Would he have killed him immediately? Or the more likely choice, live up to his word and kill everyone Goku cared for before leaving him last? Krillin cheered even though he found it hard to move after catching a blow from the ape. "With the Dragon Balls and Bulma's brains, we would have figured out how to wish for all of this to be fixed," he said enthusiastically, scratching his head. The group made their way towards the capsule copter, with the stronger members helping to carry Goku, as Piccolo, assisted by Tien, tagged along quietly. Raditz's body and his pod had been put in some capsules as Bulma wanted to look at them later. She planned on returning to collect anything she might have missed after they had returned to Capsule Corp and made sure everyone was okay. But what they missed, however, was the scouter that Raditz had been wearing had not been destroyed in the fight. It had been transmitting live footage of everything that had happened to the other Saiyan. They had seen the techniques they used, the strength they possessed, their ability to seemingly hide their true power, and the more obvious, that they knew how to deal with Saiyans. But that hadn't been what caught their attention. No. What had caught their attention was these so-called Dragon Balls that could grant wishes. If it weren't for these supposed items, they would have no interest in that backwater planet. Vegeta scoffed as he cut the transmission. Raditz had been weak, gaslit by his own supposed strength, and gotten himself killed for it. Vegeta was inclined to ignore this, but even though he wanted to, he couldn't let one of the last remaining Saiyans be cut down without blood paid in return 1,000,000-fold. Plus, the knowledge of something that could grant wishes had its appeal. Maybe now he could finally beat Frieza. Now he just had to think of his approach.